Operation Guardian of the Walls is underway in Jerusalem. More than 500 rockets have been launched at Israel since Monday evening. Israel has responded. Hamas boasts launching 137 rockets within a 5-minute period. That, by the way, does impact the effectiveness of Iron Dome, which is as Wes described, is the missile defense system that Israel has. It's very sophisticated, but when you got 137 rockets coming in that short of a period of time, it makes it difficult. Rick Grenell is Senior Advisor to the ACLJ, former Acting Director of National Intelligence and Ambassador to Germany. Rick, what's your read on the situation?
First of all, let's just remind people that if we had seen rocket attacks or terrorist attacks coming from Mexico or Canada, how would the Americans respond? How would the American government respond? We would be unequivocal. That wouldn't happen for more than a couple of minutes before we would stop it. And so let's put it in perspective on what's happening and make sure that we're supporting Israel. There's a lot of talk about what goes on in the Palestinian territories and who's in control. And this Biden administration has just brought those leaders to the table. We've given them money. We've included them like never before at the UN. And look what they're doing in response. They're certainly not making it easy for themselves. And let's also remember that they were offered a very good deal under the Abraham Accords by Jared Kushner and his team. And the Palestinian leaders rejected all of that. And so their response after rejecting all sorts of peace deals, economic deals, has been now to resort back to terror.
You know, it's interesting here, Rick, because Iran is also at the table, and Wes Smith can address this, Colonel Smith. Hamas used a new rocket. I said this in the first segment of the broadcast. It's called an A-120. It's named for a commander killed by the IDF during the Gaza War of 2014. The A-120 is said to have a range of about 120 kilometers, roughly 40 miles. But, Wes, the reports are, and we don't have this verified yet, but these came out of Iran.
Right. That's all indications are that that's where they came from, the technology to extend the range of their rockets. Keep in mind, these are very deadly, sophisticated rockets, but they're rockets, not missiles. And just like Iran has provided guidance technology for Hezbollah's missiles and rockets, the indications are they're providing technology to Hamas now so they can extend the range, because a 43, 44-mile range on a rocket, Hamas up until now has not been able to pull that off.
Yeah, and now they're able to attack Jerusalem. In fact, rockets landed less than 4 miles from our office in Jerusalem yesterday. So, and David Benjamin, who is our senior counsel there, is also an IDF colonel as a judge advocate general, a lawyer for an international law of war. He was on our broadcast, as was Rami Levy, our director general, and they both said that Jerusalem was literally under siege yesterday, and that ups the ante here significantly, politically.
Because when Jerusalem is under siege, certainly the Ayatollah in Iran and the entire Iranian regime celebrate. Look, we've seen this on the Ayatollah's Twitter feed over the last week. He has been propping up the Palestinian leaders and really articulating the Israel hate right to his followers. This is something that, if you look at over the last week, he has been egging on. There's no question that they are in support of what's going on, both materially and psychologically. And so we need to know exactly the ties, and the Biden administration needs to understand that they are the ones who brought the Palestinian leaders and the Iranian regime leaders to the table. If we're going to start having engagement, then we need to benchmark whether or not engagement works. Clearly, when they resort to terrorist attacks like this, the engagement practices from the Biden administration are backfiring. They are not working. The money that we've been giving them, the access and the diplomatic access that we have been giving them via the Europeans clearly is not working. Jake Sullivan and the National Security Council need to look at all these tangential facts and realize that isolation is what works with this Iranian regime.
So, you also have a situation that 30 warning shots were fired by U.S. warships at 13 Iranian attack boats targeting guided missile submarine Georgia and its escort of 7 military vessels. So that's in the Straits of Hormuz, Harry. So you've got people need to understand this. We've got a multi-level, multi-jurisdictional conflict brewing right now. We're actually underway in the Middle East.
Absolutely. And it's imperative to keep in mind that Iran, along with the Palestinians, have essentially rejected the Abraham Accords. And Iran continues to expand its aggression through allies in the Middle East. And so I think this move by the U.S. Navy is an important move, but it underscores, I think, the risk in caving to Iran. By caving to Iran, by providing them with financial resources, we are fueling terror ultimately.
I'm letting you hear right now on our radio audience, you can hear red alerts. That means right now there are missiles being launched or have been launched against Israel. In fact, I will know where it has been in that usually takes a minute. Kfar Aza, so it's near the Gaza border is where those are coming up. I haven't had to play that, Rick. I used to keep that on our radio broadcasts all the time for decades. And then in the last 4 years, I did not have to use it because this wasn't happening. So a change of administrations and a change of policy has direct consequences for the people in Israel. There is no question about it.
And I keep harping on this point, but Jay, it is worth talking about. The Biden administration has been given money to the Palestinian Authority leaders. They have engaged with them. They brought them in, and look what the response is. I don't understand how our leaders in Washington cannot see whether or not the engagement policies work or not. It's just beyond comprehension that they cannot see that it gets worse as you provide money to the Palestinian Authority and as you engage with Iran. This is something that we need to articulate, and the Israelis certainly are feeling the brunt of a bad, weak Biden policy.
Yeah, it's interesting because Andrew Yang, who's running for a Democrat, ran for president, is running for mayor of New York City, said, "I'm standing with the people of Israel who are coming under bombardment attacks and condemn the Hamas terrorists. The people of New York City will always stand with our brothers and sisters in Israel who face down terrorism and persevere." Ilhan Omar, however, of course, why shocking here, many will tell you Israel has a right to defend itself to safety and security, but are silent on whether the Palestinians have those rights too. Until we defend the rights of Palestinians just as we do Israelis, we have no leg to stand on when it comes to justice or peace. Can anybody tell me what rocket Israel launched into Gaza before this started? Or was it Hamas launching into Israel, which it always is? So Hamas used an excuse of an issue in Jerusalem on a neighborhood to start an air bombardment, a missile fire, rocket fire, I should say, to be precise. So there is no moral equivalency. Go ahead, Rick.
There is no question, and there is no moral equivalency as you're saying. But also, let's remember, we hear a lot of criticism, certainly from congressional leaders like Ilhan Omar, that the Palestinian Authority, the leaders in the Palestinian territories don't have the same equipment as Israel. We constantly hear that. But let me just make one point. The Palestinian Authority does have the ability to have a system in place that is just like the dome. And the system is don't fire on Israel, and you won't be fired upon by Israel. There is no question that you can be secure. You can be assured that no one is going to fire rockets into your territory if you don't start first. Israel is not the aggressor here. And the Palestinian Authority leaders need to understand that they have the ability to ensure their people's safety. And it's called don't launch the rockets first.
Wes.
And as is usual with the Palestinians, Rick, no good deed goes unpunished. The backdrop of this was there's a pending court case about neighborhoods that you mentioned in East Jerusalem and who the land actually belongs to. And it was also Jerusalem Day, a holiday in Israel. Prime Minister Netanyahu postponed the court proceedings in order to keep peace and rerouted the parade away from the Palestinian neighborhood. And yet that was not good enough. Hamas gives them a 1-hour deadline to remove all police and troops from the area, a deadline that they knew Israel could not meet. And then when the deadline passed, they started launching rockets at Jerusalem.
Yeah, they're the instigator. There's no doubt about it. Israel has responded. They have responded by also operating a new operation called Operation Guardian of the Walls. The walls, of course, are the walls of Jerusalem. Rockets are landing in Jerusalem. A number of them landed within 4 miles of our office. The average rate of rocket fire is 1 every 3 minutes. They did launch, Hamas boasted that they could launch 137 rockets within a 5-minute period, which puts Operation Iron Dome at its maximum capacity. Rick Grenell is with us, of course, our senior advisor here at the ACLJ on our team. We just got a tweet from your friend Zara from Iran. And this is what he says. The attack on Al-Aqsa Mosque and the killing of worshipers is the greatest evidence of the racist criminal nature of the usurping entity. They don't even like saying the word Israel, which has always been the main cause of insecurity and instability in the region. There is only one fair solution to the Palestinian issue, which is to refer it to the will of the people of this land and to refer it to a popular referendum. Iran, of course, had to get their 2 cents into this because not only are they supplying the weapons, they're propelling, they're the fuel to propagate this. They're trying to, they conflate issues of security internally in Israel in a neighborhood at the Al-Aqsa Mosque where the Palestinian Authority was asking for the Israeli security to be removed, which is absurd if you've ever been up there. That would be absurd. Let me just put it that way. But now you've got Iran right in the middle of this.
Look, Jay, I'm going to read to you what the Ayatollah, who is the leader of the Iranian regime, what he, 4 days ago, he said the Palestinian fighters must continue their legitimate, morally correct fight against the usurpian regime until it is forced to submit to a referendum being conducted. Just hours ago, he's tweeting about Israel not being a real country. So I don't understand why we're allowing this type of rhetoric to go on Twitter, for one. Why are we allowing this regime to be at the UN and to serve legitimately on UN committees? This violates basic Twitter rules. This violates what the left always talks about in terms of woke culture and safe spaces, but yet they're allowed to run for offices at the UN. This is clearly being fanned and pushed by the Iranian regime. And I also want to be very clear that when we talk about the Iranian regime, it's not the Iranian people.
Exactly.
Iranian people are very good people who are being really victimized by their regime. We have to remember that in the United States. We cannot give aid and comfort to the Iranian regime when it continues to put people, their basic freedoms at risk. These Iranian regime individuals are on Twitter, but Iranian people are not allowed to be on Twitter.
So,
they're not allowed to use the internet.
Yeah, it's interesting because we know of people, including former president of the United States, banned from Twitter, and yet the Ayatollah, who is wreaking havoc and killed millions and suppresses his people, is given a free reign. I mean, in Washington, this should show the absurdity of some of what big tech's allowing here. I mean, that is when you think about that for a moment, it is really absurd.
Well, there's always a double standard there, Jay. And look, I'd love to get Rick's thoughts on this because there's clearly a deeper divide inside the Democrat Party on this issue of whether or not we're going to stand by our ally Israel. We mentioned earlier in the broadcast some strong comments from some Democrat members, Senator Rosen, Congressman Hoyer, Congressman Meeks, but then you had the squad coming out and trying to draw this moral equivalency. I have my own theories on this, but Jay, I think it lends itself to a question of who is the Biden administration listening to. Rick mentioned that they're still giving funds. I think it's a clear indication that the squad has the ear of the White House more than some of these more reasonable members of the Democrat Party. As Rick, maybe I could ask that of you if I could, Jay. Is that your read of this? Do you think that the White House is listening to the squad members?
I think at this point, the White House doesn't know what to do because they view all foreign policy issues as domestic policy And that's the big mistake. They cannot talk tough on China. They continue to say Russia, Russia, Russia. They cannot call out the Iranian regime because what they're trying to do is placate the far left of their party. So yes, Ilhan Omar, all of the squad members are the ones who are scaring Jake Sullivan and Nancy Pelosi and Joe Biden and Kamala Harris into silence, and they want to let this play out. But you do have people like, let's remember Senator Bob Menendez, who is very tough on Iran, is a very good member of the Democratic Party. He's an expert on foreign policy. And so I think that they should be listening to Bob Menendez and some of their other leaders that clearly have stepped out, like Andrew Yang. There are people that are warning.
I read Andrew Yang's tweet, which I'll read again. It says, "I'm standing with the people of Israel who are coming under bombardment attacks and condemn the Hamas terrorists. The people of New York City will always stand with their brothers and sisters in Israel who face down terrorism and persevere." I don't like calling them the squad, by the way. I'll tell you why. That's like giving it – it's like propping it up as if there's something. Let me tell you what they are. Radical leftist members of Congress that have an anti-Semitic, anti-Israel agenda. That's just to start. So Ilhan Omar or I'm losing the name of the other one. But Ilhan Omar kind of leads the pack. Yeah, leads the pack. Everything they say is going to be anti-Israel. Why don't the Palestinians have an Iron Dome? I've got a question. Why doesn't Hamas stop firing indiscriminate rockets at civilians in Israel? That may be a good way to start your national security. Did you have to worry about that the last 4 years, Gaza? Did you have to worry about Israel shooting in rockets in response to your rockets? No, you didn't. You know why? Because there was a leader in the White House that had a clear policy and had people like Rick Grenell and Mike Pompeo implementing those policies so that they didn't get pushed around. Strength. What the Israelis said was right. When you're dealing with adversaries like this, they understand one thing: power. Now, diplomacy can be power, so long as behind that diplomacy is strength. And, Rick, what I think is lacking right now is any clear policy and strength. Both of them are missing.
Well, let's also remember this: the boss is in his 15th year, his 4-year term. They haven't had elections here, so they don't have a legitimate leadership in place. The Palestinian people are not being well served by the Palestinian Authority leadership, and that's what's got to change. The American policy should be get your act together and have elections. It can't get much worse. I know some people think that it can. I don't think it actually can. You might have a conversation about what the future is and what's working and what's not working. But I like your point about the Iron Dome. They do have the ability to have a system that is just as good as the Iron Dome, and that is don't fire first, and then you will be protected.
I mean, I've been there on the border and watched the rockets come in over our heads and the Israeli response, which was then Black Hawk helicopters or like Black Hawk helicopters with rocket and precise. And then Israeli jets and the Israeli Air Force coming over. So I've seen it. Rick, thanks for being with us. We appreciate it.